All right, going live, and we are live. Welcome, everybody, for week 12. Wes, can you believe it? Week 12 already?
I can't believe it. When you first told me we were going to do this, I'm like, I think he's crazy every single week. It's been awesome. And look at the numbers, 1890. Wow.
Yeah. It keeps creeping up. Kyle, thanks again for all the support. Week 12. I know you were great in kindly grilling me about, hey, how is this all going to work and everything. And so I appreciate your continued support of the project. So.
For sure, man. And if you see the community right now, they're asking questions about, who's rocking a mask at this moment. I can't tell if they're talking about like from COVID or if they were thinking something a little bit more shady. So,
all right. Well, we've got a bunch of people coming in still. We're going to kick things off today with just one or two quick things in terms of announcements. I put it way up in chat. I'm going to put it again, but we are doing a actually, I thought I had cut and pasted. Let me go copy and paste it one more time. But we are doing a cyber event with the folks from Perch, Huntress, and ID Agent. I put it in there again, August 11th through 13th. That's awesome, Wes. Now, you may be all webinared out. It's completely understandable, and we are paying attention to that. That's why each day there's only one session. That's it. But simultaneously going on for your technical folks is a 3-day capture the flag competition. We're going to be talking a little bit about capture the flag today because it lends itself into today's conversation. We're going to talk today about if you've never done capture the flag, but what I would ask of all of you, if you could spread the word, because we've got 3 excellent thought leadership sessions, as well as a great collaborative effort between the Perch SOC, the Huntress SOC, and the ID Agent threat team. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and you're going to learn a ton. So let me get into the wood here today, and first off, introduce my good friend, SVP of Global for EC Council, Steve Graham. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Steve, I'm just going to give just a real brief background. You could do it probably far better than I could on the history of ethical hacking, but kind of just to set the stage for everybody. It was interesting doing the research, and, I've seen a lot through your eyes in the past 3.5 years that, we've been talking and looking how to bring training and certifications to the MSP and MSSP community. But it's really interesting that the term ethical hacking, from my understanding, came around in 1995 by a guy named John Patrick from IBM. But even before then, its origins come from the 1960s when the term hacking, which is misused, or rather seen as a really bad thing today, it was actually a good thing in the 60s by a group of MIT engineers who were looking to optimize systems. So just in terms of the lineage, and then and I kind of remember this. It was in the 70s where it flipped from the white hat, meaning a good thing, to kind of a bad thing when people, I don't know if you guys, you're probably too young, but there was all this buzz out there about people basically getting phone lines, hacking into phone lines to make international calls because they were so expensive back then, right, Kyle? All
about freaking.
Freaking, yeah. It was this term freaking, and I remember these things like party lines growing up and all this crazy stuff. But that was the genesis for it to flip to kind of this, bad, if you will, view. So, what I was going to just kind of in segueing over to you, Steve, for the first, kind of question. We hear about all these. I don't have to bring up the horrific stats. Everybody knows them about hacking today. But, the intent of white hacking and a white hacker is to do the bad things, right, that a black hat hacker would do, and we'll talk about those terms, with the intent to protect an organization. So Steve, could you share with us a little bit of background, maybe just starting off with EC Council and a little bit of just, I think it would be helpful for people to understand how this all came about, certified ethical hacker. And you've been part of the MSPs. I've kind of brought you into the foray of a lot of these, several peer groups and talking to these folks. And why do you feel MSPs should care today? So that's probably a lot at you, but I hope that's okay.
Yeah, we'll see if I can remember the question.
Yeah, I can give them to you one at a time if you'd like.
Yeah, I've got, over the last, I started with EC Council back in 2004 and really started the North American division of the company then. And I've got horror stories and jokes I can tell, all along the way. But I'll tell you, you kind of referenced the history of ethical hacking and how some of these things have evolved. What I think is the most interesting is having, the purview that I think we've had at EC Council. Our background is in really building education and certification programs. And there's a lot of, I think there's mixed opinions on, what a certification brings as far as, does that really make me a professional? And it certainly gives you a bump up in the right direction when you're moving that way. But if you look at how ethical hacking in the industry has evolved, Wes, I think accurately noted the Captain Crunch whistles, right? So the idea there was, those phone systems originally worked with tone signals. They would listen for certain tones, and then that's how they would perform their call routing. So Captain Crunch whistles just hit those tones perfectly, and you could start to bill your long distance calls to somebody else. That was just an example of using a system in a way that, it's taking an input that it expects, but you're using it to get some kind of a different result, right? So I remember kind of going back to, 2003, 2004, when, I took this crazy job with a program that was, it was an international group that was doing this hacking program. And they said, we're going to change, the objective then was, we're going to change the world and we're going to teach them the standards in ethical hacking and what that means. I remember my first, honestly, my first 7 years with EC Council was getting hung up on, having people yell at me, like, how are you calling me as a hacker? Don't ever say hacker over my phone line. And I mean, people were just allergic to the word hacker to begin with. As soon as you said hacker, we started business a long time ago with the government that I think was very forward thinking in the way they would approach information security. And quite honestly, the procurement officers hated the word hacking so much that we had to come out with a different brand name just to allow it to go through procurement. So we actually created a certified network defense architect. And that was the certified ethical hacker, just the different name so that we get it through procurement. But what we've seen evolve over that time is people started to harness what ethical hacking really means. So, one of the taglines that we have is, to beat a hacker, you have to think like a hacker. And that kind of plays into where I think a lot of the value, the MSP conversations that I've been in, and just seeing what, what the marketing messages around MSPs, or just around technology in general. So many vendors will, they spin up a marketing document, and that marketing document says, this solution is going to make you absolutely secure. That's how it's intended. But we all know that once you deploy something on a network, the thing that really gets you are the configurations and the exceptions. So you've got your shrink wrap box that says this product is going to do X for me. And then once you actually install it, and there's one other application that you've got to open one additional port for that thing to call home and get its software updates, you're ultimately opening a hole in the network. And there may be some unintended consequences that aren't there in your instruction manual. And that's where ethical hacking really starts to play in. So when you've got a technical manual that says this is how you're supposed to configure something, and not naming any specific vendors, but let's just say one of the big operating system vendors that tends to release a lot of security updates after a product goes out. Those are indications of, not everything's perfect when we first roll it out, and we learn along the way as the world kind of tests our products, right? That there are certain configuration changes we have to make to stay secure. But when you deploy a methodology for ethical hacking internally, you're throwing all that marketing aside. And it's not a technical acumen per se. There are a lot of technical acumens that are there. But the shift happens when you realize that ethical hacking is a psychological mindset, right? It is, I'm now looking at my network and I'm saying, if a hacker is going to come in, they're going to find the weakest link. It doesn't matter where the weakest link is. If they need to use a tool like social engineering and they need to try to get people to admit information that lets me in, if it's running a network scan and finding, vulnerabilities that have already been classified and then running an exploit against those things, it's this idea of, I'm going to come at an organization from any angle possible. And what we ultimately did was we built it into a methodology. So there's these 5 phases of ethical hacking. And instead of just throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks, we teach people to follow that methodology every time and thoroughly, right? So it starts with reconnaissance. That reconnaissance is where you spend almost all of your time. You're planning out, what your avenue of attack is. And the difference from, Andrew, you had mentioned, the kind of the evolution of white hat hacking and how those things work. So the difference of, a white hat hacker versus a black hat, or, a hacker versus an ethical hacker is, if you're an ethical hacker, you're doing it under contract, right? You don't have nefarious intent. If you find something that's, absolutely horrible, when you dive in, you're not going to go release that to the market and sell it on the black market. You're going to let the people in the organization know, listen, you've got a hole in your network and this is what it means to you. This is the risk that it poses. Let's work together to find out some countermeasures, ways that we can plug that hole. But they're going to use the same methods that, any hacker would. So the idea there is they're not locked into one specific approach. They're going to try social engineering. They're going to try anything they can find that's open source. They're going to do network scanning. They're going to find application vulnerabilities, whatever it is. But in that methodology, it's kind of these 5 steps, right? So it's reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, and then covering your tracks. And as they go through that process in every system in the organization, just imagine if you can successfully set up a backdoor to an organization, completely delete all the log files and hide the fact that you were ever there, but you're still maintaining access and the IT team doesn't know you're there, other people can have that same level of access to your network. So when you show an organization that this is a hole that you have, it allows them to take those actions. And it's not around a specific technology or a specific solution or a specific vendor. It's when all those things come together and all those exceptions have been made, what's the actual deployed architecture look like and where do those vulnerabilities exist? And where the real problem comes in is new vulnerabilities crop up every day. So if you tested yesterday, that doesn't necessarily make your network secure today, because new things do crop up all the time. And that's where, having things like threat intelligence and, other things that can help configure and secure that network really come into play. But it's a continuous evolution. We've seen companies, all over the world over the last 15 years start to adopt that process and understand that, hey, just because I say hacking, it's not necessarily a bad word. This is just a different way that we approach security with a whole different mindset.
That was great. I really appreciate that background, and I think everybody out there probably does. Also, Kyle, this is where I wanted to bring in you. This is your profession. You get the duress calls from MSPs on a regular basis, unfortunately. But there's been good things with MSPs that have come to you and said, "Hey, Kyle, I think." I don't want to take words out of your mouth, but I think you've said, hey, I think I found something here, Kyle. So why do you feel this skill is critical to MSPs? And can you share some of those stories?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short here real quick, but directly to the point. I got to get more hackerish for this conversation.
You don't have to keep it short, by the way. This is what we're here for.
I'll join you, Kyle.
So now that we've got, there we go. We're all hackered up. We're ready to have the conversation. Where I'm going with all this nonsense at the end of the day is like the most beautiful part of what was just shared was at the end of the day, some of these things, whether it's EC Council or any of these, it's a lot about being able to determine, like, just because I wear a hoodie and I've got the shady background, I even got the cool anonymous flag, right? I'm waving, is there anything that makes me good at security, right? And those points that we made before about, it's about the way that you think a problem, the way that you approach a problem, the way that you're going to try to say, just because the documentation says I can do this, is there anything that's truly Are you doing more than just trusting? Are you actually validating? That whole mindset is a lot what you get. I'm also like, a lot of people will come to me and say, Kyle, well, what certifications do you hold? And at once upon a time in my life, I held, Security Plus, CEH, CISSP, etc. But I'm at the point in my life now where, for me personally, the certification doesn't set me apart. It's my accolades and what I do above and beyond. But for organizations that are getting started and looking for something measurable, to me, when I'm looking at hiring folks, professionals, even outside of just Huntress, it's literally, are you the type of person who's thinking the right way about doing this? Even if it's in defense, can you think offensively to be able to plug these holes? And I'm seeing the huge difference already amongst MSPs who are actually leveraging this. The last 3 major vulnerabilities in our own like PSA RMM related tools, all 3 of them brought to me by 3 different MSPs. That's a great indication of where our community is going. These are some of the things that you're going to have to figure out, just the same way painters or electricians will come and say, look, we are compliant with these standards and we have these insurances, and they're able to truly differentiate themselves. And if somebody still wants to go with the janky guy down the road that once played with, the electrician box, they can make that differentiation. But for you, you're going to have somebody's external credibility saying, yes, my staff does think this way and they're at least this high, but it's just one part of it. So, yes, I get a lot of calls from MSPs under distress. This weekend, sharing a little bit of threat intel, I had somebody whose Screen Connect set up, where they had an old API user with a weak default password got in there, over 5,000 computers targeted that way. Another one was through Kaspersky's Security Control Center. This is an antivirus product that allows you to push products. Well, it also allows you to push ransomware. But what was beautiful about this is both of these companies had employees that thought with a hacker mindset. They still missed it. So they're not perfect. But what's cool about it is when they came to me, they said, look, I've already identified the source. I know this is here. Here's the actions I've taken. And I think all of these will help you better align, not just from a technical and measurable standpoint, but hopefully it starts going into your sales, your marketing piece. And I won't steal any of Gary's thunder, but to me, what this means the most is you're thinking in the right way that's going to allow you to differentiate somebody who never makes this investment. So you're going to get 2 thumbs up from me.
Thanks, Kyle. Wes, so let me ask you from kind of the practitioner side, if you will. You've been through a ton of audits, had pen testers in, but you also personally, you do ethical hacking. You're very familiar with these type of skills. What are your thoughts? What would you like to share?
Yeah, I want to make sure we capture all areas of the audience today on this call when we're talking about this, right? So what I mean by that is you may be a small MSP and you're hearing this and you're like, okay, so how do I get in? Are you telling me that I need to start doing penetration testing? Are you telling me I got to start doing like red team kind of stuff internally? Like, what are you telling me here? And what I would tell you is it's commensurate with who you are. It's commensurate with your maturity. If you're just building your security stack, you need to focus, like I was saying in the chat just a minute ago to Jeremy, focus on building a security culture first. And then once you get that culture going, you'll understand how to operationalize this, right? And so like, why do we get involved in this? So, I've worked with a lot of other banks in my banking days that had enormously large red teams. And now the hot thing is purple teams. It's sort of like this conglomeration between the defense guys and the offensive guys that are sort of meshing together like DevOps. Everyone loves to, I'm sure eventually it'll be like pink team and so on and so forth. But the reason that big orgs do things like that is so that they can test their controls. So they have a leg up in thinking through, hey, how would an adversary do something? And I want to operate with full knowledge of my network. A lot of times I bring in a third-party penetration test. I just want to say, how would they handle this from a blank slate? But red team, how would they handle this from knowing the infrastructure internally? If, how could we bypass certain controls? When can those controls be bypassed? How do we make sure we report and have knowledge of those things? I'm not saying every MSP has to do those things, but the advantage of like even the certified hacker pathway is it gives you this knowledge. It gives you this understanding. It gives you this level of comfort of what security and security testing is all about. And then guess what happens? That then bleeds into the understanding and comfort of talking about security concepts in a relatable way with your clients, which is really, really important. That's something I think we miss as a gap. And so, I guess I just wanted to say that that's the goal is there's an internal goal that you get out of this, but there's also an external function that you get out of building security expertise as well. And something I think we could all leverage as well.
Yeah. It's a good point. I like the again, coming back to the keeping it simple, starting with security culture. This question's kind of to all of you. I'm going to start with Steve. Where do you begin, Steve? Like Wes said, and you've seen, Steve, there's varying levels of maturity with MSPs. That's not a bad thing. It is. And so are there some simple steps that you'd recommend people taking? I'll start with you and then kind of just go around the horn.
Yeah, to be honest, I think this is a really tough battle to fight from the bottom up. So when you look at, where do I start? You start by, I think, getting the executives to care, right? That's a really good place to start so that you have their backup. But when you look at, from a security professional standpoint, trying to get into this, there's tons of resources out there. There's lots of places that you can go learn, individual fundamentals. There's tools where you can start to get into it. But I think, for the long haul, it's always best to learn the math before you learn how to use a calculator. And it comes down to your core IT concepts. And that's one of the things I think a lot of people are afraid of is, I've had this career in IT and I've heard about this cyber thing, but I haven't really made the leap. We talk to a lot of people that are like that. We tell them, you have the core set. If you've been working IT, you're doing network admin work, you're doing configurations. It's not really that much different. We're just going to use a lot of those similar tools in a different way. And then it's a matter of changing your mindset. But a lot of it is the same type of work. It's the same, you're going through logs and you're going through configurations and you're working with a couple of frameworks to figure out, what does a vulnerability mean? And then you can start playing around with some of the exploit tools. But I think, where you start to play, and I think it plays into the rest of this conversation, is find a playground. And that's what some of these competitions do, right? When you look at these CTF events and red versus blue, the last thing you want to go is go deploy a big attack on your live network. You don't know what it's going to do because you might unintendedly actually take that company out. So do that in a safe environment and, learn how powerful the tools really are. Learn how powerful a single configuration change can be and what it means to the organization. And once you start to establish those boundaries, you'll know you have to learn where your own limits are, I think, before you do this in any kind of a live environment. And that's one of the things, having that, a competition network or a sandbox to play in, something that just allows you to test the actual skills. You've got to get beyond the theory and the reading, and, you've got to go out and fly that plane for the first time. But do it in a way that you're not going to kill yourself, right? do it in a safe sandbox, deploy some tools, crash some stuff, and just see how it behaves. That's a good way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what is the book? I'll have it over here, but they talk about the link. You mentioned a crash a plane. It's something called the link trainer. It was when, believe it or not, in right around between World War II, these pilots were asked to deliver mail in the winter. They took them from the Army and they kept crashing. Hold on. It's an awesome book. The Talent Code. It talks literally about that. Wes, you're shaking your head. I'll turn the question to you. Can you believe, and go to you then, Kyle, 50-50. I asked, do you practice ethical hacking in your organization? We got, of the votes, I'm really interested, really cool to see at least we got a 50-50 split here. Talk to me.
Yeah, I actually would have guessed it would be lower. It'd be more trending towards no, but I promise you, if you were to poll those that say yes, it's different varying degrees of it.
Yeah.
And okay, and that should be celebrated. The way that my organization practices testing of internal security should be and is different than every other organization on this call, and that is okay. That is a good thing. We should have it in a way that's nimble and flexible for all of us. And what I mean by that, again, is you're going to have some very capable organizations that do a lot, some that are not. And a great example of this, in the CTF that we did with Huntress a few months ago at PerchiCon, we got the same feedback. We had people that said, I don't really know a lot about security. I just want to do the CTF to learn. And then you had others that within, minutes were solving some of the flags. I mean, that's a good thing. We're all learning here. We're all practicing that tradecraft. We're all getting better, and we all have a different starting point. We all have a different point where we're at today. And again, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's better to start now than not do anything at all. Right. And I think that's something we should celebrate, Andrew. Yeah,
very true. Kyle, there are internships at Huntress for the MSP. Is that what would you say, Kyle? Where's your people?
I mean, the internship starts with the CTF we're hosting, right? Between us, Perch, and ID Agent. I have read the Talent Code. So
cool.
Their tagline in that book is something like, greatness isn't born, it's grown.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool way that reiterates the same point that we started the episode with Steve, saying like, look, it's about building from the ground up. So I would also, maybe if you don't even read that one, that's like an Audible, use one of those credits that you've, said you were going to use forever and go look it up.
Yeah, very true. Steve, maybe just briefly, I'm keeping an eye on time here. I always say we're going to go a half hour. We always go about an hour, but we're going to be doing this competition. Can you share a little bit about, Jeopardy style versus red team, blue teams? For those who don't know, ours is going to be a Jeopardy style type event. Fair, Wes, from what we typically run, but yep. Steve, can you share a little bit about the differences there?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is how well you can plan, attack, and adjust, right? So we see in the Jeopardy style competitions, typically you're going up after kind of it's a predefined target. You may or may not know all the details about that target, but your job is to capture a flag in kind of a controlled environment. The nice thing about those, they lend themselves very well to learning because it's a fairly static environment when you're in them. Whereas when you've got an active, red versus blue or a red and blue exercise, those sands are shifting under your feet the whole time. So you definitely need to have a better grasp on, what's really going on downrange. Because in, red and blue, you've got a defending team and an offensive team. And, the defensive team has a set of assets they have to protect, and the red team is doing everything they can to break in. So you're going to see a lot of change on the network, a lot more, active network traffic, people coming at you from different angles. Whereas, in that Jeopardy style, what we typically see is you're going up against, there's a vulnerability that's been configured that is going to be exploitable, but you've got to figure out how to classify that. Identify what the vulnerability is. That's usually figuring out what target you're looking at, how you're going to go after it, what tools you're going to use, what are the kind of the scope of limitations in that environment. But it's a great way to learn because you can nail down, different core techniques. If it's hacking into a web server, maybe it's a SQL injection, it's a SQL vulnerability that site has. You'll have those kind of specific vulnerabilities sitting there. But they're fun competitions to attend.
Well, we had a great one the last time, and I expect this one to be the same. So, Steve, just talk to us in closing about, oh, by the way, I put up a poll. Would you like to learn more about this skill? Of those answered, 41 yeses, 1 no. We don't do any quote unquote pitching and selling here, Steve, but I will email people on the side if it's okay with everybody. Just maybe give me a yes or no. You created something called Code Red, which allows people to take like I think there's like 100 courses in there now. There's ethical hacking, capture the flag courses, identity and access management, all this stuff. I think there's going to be even a promo for $99 a year per person for a short period of time. It'll eventually go to $199, but it's still ridiculously even at your full price. So I just wanted you to. It was cool to see the yeses. So I will put that out there if it's okay with everybody in a follow-up email. But Steve, talk to us about, in closing, in a few minutes here, about what CyberQ is. I think it's a really interesting concept that hopefully we're going to be able to bring to everybody. And I'd love Kyle's and Wes's comments on what CyberQ is. And then we'll move on and bring a real live MSP on here with Gary, and we'll talk business. So go ahead, Steve.
So Andrew, do you want CyberQ or do you want Code Red?
No, talk to us about CyberQ. What you got going on there? I'll make sure that I talk to them about Code Red and those types of things. So, but go ahead, talk, because CyberQ is really interesting. I think where you analogize an IQ to it.
Okay. So, so real fast background, and I'll just take a minute on this. I had kind of talked about the value of getting started is you got to have a sandbox to play in. We built a lab product. It's education technology to go along with our learning back in about 2008, and we give people access to a remote data center, and in that you can spin up 5 virtual machines, 10 virtual machines, and practice different attacks and stuff across the wire. It's pretty a pretty simple, just asynchronous lab platform. But what we realized over time was, as cloud computing started to really develop, what were the ways that we could build a platform that would bring DoD grade cyber competition capability to everybody, without having $1 million price tag. So ultimately what we set out to do was build a technology that, the best way to describe this thing in a very short form, and I apologize for the analogy, but it's kind of like the AWS of cyber ranges. So we built in, software defined networking. You can spin up pretty much any exercise you want. You can build full, Jeopardy style CTFs. You can build red versus blue. It's got all the team coordination events, all that kind of stuff in it. And you can do all that in a matter of a couple of minutes because the whole thing runs on a templating system. But the part of it that's unique that we're really looking forward to is we've linked this up with a partner we have called Yet Analytics, where we extract all of the information of how they interact with this cloud environment. And we do full packet capture. We analyze the entire stack as anybody's interacting with a VM. So anything they send across the network, anything they do with an individual machine or a file, you name it, we capture all that out into a thing called a learning record store. And we're able to run these analytical assessments on everything they do in the system. And then we can benchmark them against others. So if there's a specific vulnerability and it has an attack, if they deploy the attack, their method of deploying that attack is going to be compared to 1,000 other people who did the same thing. And instead of saying this is right or wrong, we can say, well, you did this in a very skillful, stealthy fashion versus you took out all of the critical network services as you were trying to log into this website, right? And being able to pull that kind of analytics back, it shows people broken down to an individual skill level, you're doing this in a very skilled fashion, or, this is something that you really need to work on. And we can break that down to individual knowledge elements to help them start building, ultimately that core assembly of knowledge and skills that they need. It gives them the insight a little bit more than you earned X number of points in this competition. It's, yeah, you got some points and you won the competition, but we're actually assessing every skill you deployed along the way and how skillfully you use those things. And giving that kind of a level of feedback, you can start to see where your weaknesses exist and where you can invest for your employees or where you invest your time as an individual to start just getting better at the job.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wes, comments on that? And I got Kyle. I'm going to ask Kyle a question here. And
yeah, the one thing I do want to say very quickly is cyber ranges that are pre-built for you are a godsend. I mean, it is. You will spend. I remember the early days of having to download. You guys even remember ICE and some of those like exploit, damn vulnerable Linux, like all of those that are out there. It's an enormous amount of work just to build something that you can test on and play with and learn from. And then even then, it was like super scaled down on exactly what it could do and it couldn't do. Having entire labs built out to give you training opportunity sort of is like a green field for you. It's really valuable. And we've been chatting about OSCP a lot here. I mean, they take very similar approach, and not to just, I know there's several certifications we're talking about here, but it's the same approach of like, let's give someone a lab and let them actually play on that and have the closest to a real world environment we can. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. This is different than like a CISSP where, it's academic and head knowledge. It's everyone says an inch deep, mile wide. When you're talking about ethical hacking, we're talking about doing things, right? And that requires a lot of practical experience. And so getting your hands in a lab like that Steve is talking about, super valuable. So I can't say enough about that. That is the way to learn for sure.
Cool. Kyle, I'm going to transition with a question. We'll thank afterwards. I'll thank Steve and Wes and move them. But this is kind of a perfect question coming from Joe Clapp, which will transition, bringing on Carl and Gary. Joe says, why would MSPs redirect their people's focus to other skills like ethical hacking rather than focusing on core competencies and bring in experts as needed? So I thought that was a good question.
Yeah, I think I've heard this question also asked at times of, where is the line between IT and security? And usually my answer back, right, if it's a technician, I'll get techie. But if it's somebody in business, I usually respond, that line is usually where you could stop showing value and stop making money. And that's, that hurts to have somebody get you right back in the chops when they say like, everything is an opportunity to make money if you can actually make it. You and I all know that MSPs as a whole, are good at delivering, solutions, good at delivering technology, not the greatest at selling. So I think I would say for some MSPs, massively investing in something as extreme as like an OSCP, which is a solid, one of the many different options you can get certified. Yeah, it might be too much, but at the end of the day, I would argue, these are two peas in a pod. Security and IT go hand in hand, whatever track you decide to secure yourself with. Right. And where I'm going, very specifically with this is, that line could actually be the thing that opens you up for maybe your total addressable market with your clients right now is, I'm going to be able to make $3 million, but I'm hyper competition and I can't get over that chasm. If you can now open yourself to other opportunity, a larger total addressable market for the business folks in here, to me, those are things that you're saying, why wouldn't you make that investment? So I've taken the notes. I've seen Robin gave some feedback that they're also having a hard time being able to justify why to give me the money. And I'll make sure that I come back next week with a better answer. So I hope that gave you a good segue.
Yeah. And I want to say super quickly in 30 seconds, I think one key to that is sometimes we bite off more than we can chew. And so what I mean by that is if your MSP is not already engaged in like offering and selling security services, you're not security enabled, and you don't have a culture of security, start with building the culture first. Oftentimes a key indicator that your senior management doesn't have the buy-in and doesn't have that culture of security is that they question things like that. They say, I don't see the value in that, right? And that no is not, don't interpret that no as a no never. Interpret that no as a no not now until I can get them to understand and I can get them to buy into that culture of security. Maybe we can talk about that more on a future episode of how we build a culture of security inside our MSP, but that is the key entryway to getting that done. And I learned that even at the bank I came from is building the culture first will then secure the resources you need second. And so that's probably a good thought for all of us to keep in mind.
We might even do, I just off the top of my head, Wes, as you and Kyle talk about this, segueing for next week, do that, building culture, transitioning, but also maybe even bringing on, I had the good fortune of interacting with somebody that wrote an article on ethical hacking, and it actually, there's not a lot of females in this expert. Her name is Ruit. I think I'm pronouncing it correct. I'm probably butchering it. She's in here watching us, but it'd be cool to bring in some females into the mix because I think it would be important for others to know that, there are experts in that area as well. So, Steve, with that, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you. I hope you stay on with us. And Wes, I'll move you into the audience as well.
You got it.
Bring on Carl and Gary. Steve, we'll talk soon. Thanks again for everything. All right. Kyle, if you can keep everybody entertained for me, I'm going to go find Gary and Carl, and we'll get on the business side of things. This has been good.
It's been solid. Obviously, long episode today, but all valid points. I think, maybe my favorite part of the tap dance here while we bring people on board is we are finally starting to blur from technology, right? Cybersecurity is about technology, but from technology to business which is where we all make the money at the end of the day. So in 12 episodes, I would say we're really starting to elevate our conversations, especially because the people participating, there's a lot of technicians talking about business, talking about how do I get investment. We're really starting to have growth, I think, both as presenters and the audience. So I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't want to focus on me. Hold on a second. Unfocus. Carl, we have your can you hear us first off?
I can hear you.
Okay, we can't see you. Is that on purpose? Oh, we're waiting for Carl. Hey!
There he is.
Hello, Jerry.
It's a browser security thing. I can't just let anything access my camera.
Oh, okay. You have one of those things that you had to move to the side?
Something like that.
So, Carl, thanks for coming on with us. I'm going to let Gary take over from the business side of things, but I'll kind of segue this. Carl, you've been running a SOC 2 MSP, MSSP now for over 5 years. You've invested heavily in security. You've been on with us before. I thank you for coming on again. So you take this pretty seriously. You have ethical hacking in your business. So with that, Gary, I'm going to let you kind of transition things and take over a bit here. So.
Yeah, I enjoyed getting to listen to that first part. It was awesome. And so this is a perfect segue. Carl, I have here, Andrew gave me a quote from you, and I wanted to maybe start with that. You said that MSPs need to own their security because if you get compromised, no vendor is going to pay for your mistakes.
Yeah, look, it comes down to, in any business, you should be thinking about, as an owner, about profit and about risk, right? And the reality of it is nobody's going to come save you. You have to save yourself. You have to prevent it yourself. And so, yeah, it was just an offhand conversation I was having with Andrew. I said, yeah, you just have to remember, when it all comes down to it, you can cry about your vendor making a mistake. You can cry about following their best practice or whatever. But if that ultimately was the reason that some hack came into your environment and owned you and your customers, it's your problem, not theirs. It's just how it is.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a couple specific things, but conceptually, I think what people are struggling with is what their role is, right, as an MSP. And if you heard me, I'm not saying that all MSPs should be MSSPs. I think you should rely on vendors, but you can outsource capabilities, but you have to have a culture and some knowledge, in order to be even able to manage vendors and be able to get the end result you want for your customers. So the first question I had for you, something like ethical hacking, how did you get it implemented? Like, what was the process you used to be able to get that in as part of your culture?
Well, it's something that's kind of happened somewhat organically. I would say that kind of the first thing is that we just became regularly concerned with our risk. And so, it became a part of every conversation. It's like there's no meeting that goes on in our organization that it's not talked about or thought about. And then we simply constantly iterate. I mean, earlier they were talking about what's the line between IT and security. And in my mind, there is no line. If I'm going to do good IT, I have to be doing it securely. That's just it, period, right? And so it's just a matter of do we want to be competent, or do we want to be one of the jokers out there slinging, insecure stuff and causing all sorts of risk? And so from our perspective, I know, at least in our organization as owners, we became convinced that there's significant risk. And because of that, we naturally wanted to find ways to remediate it. And so we found ourselves doing vulnerability scans that we didn't used to do. We found ourselves implementing change management in a very strict way that we used to not do when we were very early in this process. We found ourselves vetting vendors much more stringently than we did before, and asking for a lot more things. And we've learned how to do that better as we went. So it's just, as we've continued down the process of developing our company, at some point in time, we said, you know what, it's just not enough to trust the vendor. You have to go out and actually try to get at it yourself. Think like the hacker and think, where are the things I have to close up? Where are the problems I can resolve? Where are the opportunities? And the reality of it is that you never really complete the picture until you're actually actively trying to get into an environment or thinking how it could happen and how can I prevent that.
Yep. So two things. One, so does that mean you have some people that kind of lead this in your organization, or is this something that pretty much anybody who's involved in your company, regardless of role, needs to think in this way?
So funny you put it that way. See, in our we do a quarterly all hands state of the company meeting. And one of the things that we do is we talk about how everybody in our organization is a cyber warrior, and we're at war and we must defend ourselves. And that is our default position. And there's nobody that's exempt from that. And so, yes, we have technical people that lead different areas of expertise in our organization, but there is nobody at any level in our organization that doesn't need to be trained, aware, part of the process, and part of defending our environment and our customers.
Okay, so how much, compared to when you look back maybe 3 years ago, right, compared to being more mature now, how much more time and effort does this all take is part one of the question. Number two, how were you able to go out and, charge enough to your customers so you can put that time and effort, into this compared to someone who doesn't?
It's funny you say that, because that's another one that's like really been interesting to work out. I mean, because what we found ourselves doing is not only for ourselves is more audits, more checks, more configuration reviews than we used to do. And we call it our compliancy process. And we do this we have weekly tasks, monthly tasks, quarterly tasks, annual tasks, and we've mapped that out. And so, to be perfectly frank, there's a fair amount of things that we're regularly doing for ourselves and our customers.
Yeah, that sounds expensive.
It is a lot of time. And so we ended up finding a way of monetizing by creating an offering for it. And basically that audit and review calendar is a charged labor event. And so it became a billing center, not a cost center for us.
Yeah. So that's one way, right, to do it. There's a couple ways to skin the cat. I was just reviewing a proposal. A friend is looking for a new, provider. And the funny thing was, when I looked at them, there was like 4 vendors. The bottom 2, I said, well, you can't use these 2. They don't charge enough. And they said, well, what do you mean? That's usually I'm looking. He goes, no. I said, no, it's the opposite with this. Let me tell you what happens when they charge that much. They're guaranteeing you can't be secure, among other things. Security is only one symptom, right? Of it. And so I think that has to, I'm assuming, be part of your culture, where now that you've done it, you know what it takes. You value that, right? Your team. And when you're out talking to a customer, you're able to share that value.
I think this is the classic thing, Gary, and you've been a long time industry proponent of this, is learning how to sell based on value rather than getting into some type of commoditized conversation. The reality of it is when we come to market, there are clients that we end up not getting because they see us as too expensive, because oftentimes our monthly is double the other people on the list. And that just is what it is. But the reality of it is we win more deals than we don't, because we've learned how to express why. And any business owner that really cares about actually getting a vendor that's successful and effective is going to prefer the approach where you're more comprehensive. They will pay more if you can simply explain the value. And so
there you go.
It's that simple.
So Andrew, over these weeks, anybody we bring on, we get to the same answer. I say it in my specific way to make a point, but everybody gets to that same thing. What Carl is saying is we've learned to weaponize low prices. Mm-hmm. We've learned to weaponize the competitor's low price. So I want that message to get through. People have been asking, like, how do we get budget? Well, think about the IT director that goes to get budget. What their board realizes, or the person they report to, that security and IT is a really small part of the total expenses in 1,000-person company. The same way we're a really small cost, right, to each of our customers. And when you start to get that and take the approach that Carl is, which is more comprehensive compared to less comprehensive, that changes, because that keeps coming up now every week. How do we get budget? They're asking the same question. Like, that's the roadblock.
Well, what's strange, Gary, is, if we were to turn back the clock 15 years when, IT was more insourced than it was outsourced, right? Obviously, it was
right.
Tremendous shift. But people would have an IT person, on staff. And if you think about what the cost of an IT person is in today's dollars, right? You think about like the overhead of that, and then you say, well, you're a 30 user environment, let's just say, and I'm, 4,500 or 5,000 a month or whatever it is, 6,000 a month. Okay, it's 6,000 a month, and people and MSPs are like, but that's $200 a seat. It's $72,000. Tell me an IT person worth their salt that's going to handle your IT and security for $72,000.
I'm saying, who cares? Whether you could do it for 72 or 100, like, it's all relative to all the costs and all the risk, Carl, right? Is out there to these companies, whether you charge them whatever, like that. It's such a small, like, they're saying I'm going to have a wet blanket moment here. That's my job to come on. But no, we never end on a wet blanket. We always end on opportunity and hope, Carl, right? So
here's the thing. I mean, you have to have a certain confidence in your approach. When somebody comes to you and says, hey, this guy's going to do it for half your price, your reaction shouldn't be, oh man, I overcharged. Your reaction should be, oh good, that person is incompetent that tried to sell them, and now I just need to help them understand why. Because if your point is so solid that, in fact, sometimes I do this analogy for an opportunity where I'll lay out the roles, lay out the work, and give them what it costs for them to just do it in source. That number's astronomical compared to what it would cost for an outsourced organization. And it's a great way to kind of put it in the context of what the budget really is. And I guarantee you, anybody sitting around thinking that they're need to be competitive and bring their prices down, they're not even close to what that number is, not even a little bit close. And so, even if our number doubles, we're still a really small, we're like right there with electricity, right there with the janitorial services on cost. Yet we're making their business secure and we're keeping them functional. And so it's just not at all a stretch to just be proud of what you do, know its value, and express it.
Right.
I would say sometimes they pay as much to the people that water the plants, right? And those people are also proactive. They water the plants before they die.
No, I like this conversation a whole lot because there's a whole lot of belief here. At the end of the day, when you know you're doing it right, when your data shows you're doing it right, when you know your value, it's really easy to tell somebody to pound sand, or maybe the more appropriate way to, this is actually why it's going to enable you to go above and beyond, and this is why it's worth investing in me more than your janitor or whatever widget that they're probably wasting money on too. So anyways, Carl, I thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
Carl, I was going to say, do you know what I find? This is why it's great having you on today. I find, and again, I have 100, MSPs that I work pretty closely with in my peer and a bunch of others. What I have found in every case, those people, if you listen to what we've been talking about the past 12 weeks, who get involved with this at the top down, that build that culture of security, the pricing and the value, it just changes. Because once you're doing it, it's easy, right, to express it. Like all the questions people have or concerns, they just melt away, right, as you build that and you build confidence in all the hard work you did to get where you are compared to where you were.
Yeah, it's a journey. It's something that it can feel uncomfortable if you don't have a lot of experience with it. But the reality of it is, you see this in your life all the time. Most of us buy based on value rather than a commoditized price when it comes to anything of significance or service. And the reality of it is the good companies know their value and they know how to express it.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome. This is really awesome stuff. So Kyle, you and I we did a webinar just recently together. So we're getting to spend more and more time together. One of the questions that comes up, and Andrew and I were talking prior to this, is there's some confusion between vulnerability management and penetrate pen testing. How do you kind of look between those two and define it?
What's awesome is there's some people on this call that do professional pen testing and vulnerability testing at the same time, like Joe Clapp that's on here. And what's beautiful is you're really looking at the result. If you talk to any of these professionals who do this full time, you're asking, what are you trying to accomplish? For instance, I can tell you, most of the time somebody says, I'm looking for a penetration test. They're using the cool descriptive word that's got everybody excited. But what they're really trying to say is, I'm looking to slightly harden this process. Most of the time, penetration tests are done in a very specific way to say, I want to harden this specific attack surface, like a web application, or this specific thing for this purpose, but you're really trying to accomplish a very specific goal. Vulnerability management might be your processes, the technical solutions, what goes in them. And yes, it might be, have you patched or have you tweaked and hardened and configured? But I would argue most of the time, Gary, most people are not truly looking for a pen test. Although the same person on that end, you might have people like, as I mentioned, Joe here that's in the chat, who services both those roles. So that might be a cool thing, Andrew, in the future, of getting some folks that do professional pen testing and share kind of their horror stories of when businesses ask for one thing, probably usually super technical and misworded, but they actually mean something completely different on the business management side.
Sure.
Carl, how do you look at that?
The difference between pen test and vulnerability. Biggest thing is I feel like one's more active and one's more passive, but I think Kyle's answer is dead on in the sense that what are you actually trying to accomplish? Because you can reduce your risk and your footprint and your attack by doing both activities. The reality of it is pen testing is not as crazy and as scary as people think it is. And it's just a matter of having the right mindset and being active about it. Vulnerability scanning can be more passive, but it is also very important, especially if your scanning methodologies can help you not only find, CVEs, but also configuration errors.
Is there one thing, Carl, I wanted to ask you through this process? Was there one or two things that happened, or either you planned or happened to you, that kind of really changed your trajectory in terms of really moving towards more of a security culture?
Well, the reality of it is if I'd be honest about it, the very first thing that happened to us is we got a large opportunity with a company that really required it, and said, if you want to be a part of this getting this bid, you need to have these credentials and have this practice. And so it was sales motivated initially, although I will say it's kind of in our DNA in the sense that I kind of grew up in the financial investment industry, worked for Charles Schwab, and I saw a lot of that going on there. So I had kind of a natural propensity towards it. But then I will say the other thing is we started finding ourselves getting involved in incident response gigs, and people would refer them to us, and we would come and help clean up. And fortunately, it wasn't on our own specific client, but we watched other managed service providers going through the chaos of becoming completely owned, them and their customers, and helped them go through that and saw what it was like. And I've seen nothing more sobering for my entire team than to be able to sit there and do that post-mortem conversation with them and say, okay, here's what we saw, here's what happened. And so I love,
and like, hey, that could have happened to us. Some of you probably said that could have happened to us, it just didn't.
The reality of it is it caused us to go, we should go see if we have that vulnerability, and oh my gosh, we do. And so it was sobering to see people I know and people that we were working with, and the type of things that they were getting owned by. And the only thing I had to say back to my team was, we can't be these guys. We've got to do better than this, We
lost Gary. And we lost Carl. What the heck?
Hey, I had to take the stage for all me. To be honest, Andrew, this is one of those moments that I needed to show hackers rule, the bookworms drool, and that is clearly what we're getting across here.
Did you wipe them off?
I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? We'll see how, if they make it back. With that said, I mean, we're right at the top of our hour. We had some awesome points. To be honest, some of the chat, I don't know if you saw, I'd probably give my gold medal just recently to either Alan Miller, who threw some huge wisdom, specifically like how to, challenge somebody who's asking you about cost. But there was other comments actually above. Gentleman George Kappas threw out some other stuff. And I even asked him, like, are you a technician or are you in management? Because his points were so solid. So huge thanks.
Yeah, I could see all that. I wasn't able to capture all of the chat, but I could see it was pervasive throughout the entire thing, and I appreciate you guys always keeping on top of it.
Just a great job today. This was really good from top to bottom, as well as what's going on in chat, right? And we see people exchanging ideas and what's happening. So people say, well, how do we get started? Well, this was one good, and every week there's different things, right? You have captured a flag. We did the IR event. Like, there's all these little things people can pick up. And then, but also, again, and I don't say this because it's what we do, because you can go other places too, but man, the you need to be in an MSP peer group right now, because we see that together, they're more likely to go faster down this road, and not necessarily security based. You can do that too, but just MSPs that are working together, MSP leaders are more likely to be able to figure this out and move their cultures up, as a team. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gary. I really appreciate you taking over there on the second part. It was, I had a blast today, and we're going to keep it going next week. Wes, closing thoughts and comments?
Yeah, I had to take the thug glasses off for that. So, what we're really talking about here is culture comes first. And I think that's something that we're hearing loud and clear, right? So we all are at different levels of maturity. Hey, there we go, Kyle. I like it. different levels of maturity, different levels of capabilities. But you know what it's really about is it's about building a culture, maintaining and establishing that culture, and then using that to be able to accomplish and deepen your cybersecurity agenda. So hearing that loud and clear from Kyle, hearing that loud and clear from Gary, Kyle, everyone else, Steve. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
You're saying, let's go, people.
Kyle, before I let you say the final things, I just wanted to thank again Steve Graham for coming on from EC Council, and Carl. Thank you so much as well. Kyle, take us home.
Camaraderie and community all day, every day is going to save our butts. The amount that we're learning, the points that we're going, even me as a speaker, I learn from you, and then I get to learn from your chat and share it with others. So just the same way that we brought, whether it's new vulnerabilities, how to start a conversation, I'm going to team up with Wes, Gary, and Andrew, and we're going to make sure that future episodes that we're going to have effectively address the questions that came up today. So please keep sharing the word, spreading the message. We're almost at 1,900. Let's try to get the sucker closer to 2,000 and build this community the right way.
Tell your friends.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you next Monday. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Gary, Kyle, Wes. Take care, everyone.